Some more reaction. We can talk to Matthew Goodwin, author and academic. Hello to you, Matthew. What do you make of Suella Braverman's sacking?
Well, I think it tells us how lost the Conservatives really are. Whatever you think about Suella Braverman, the fact is she spoke for a majority of people in the country when it came to issues like lowering migration, reforming multiculturalism, strengthening our national borders. And of course, she called out institutions like the police for ideological bias. And I know from my own polling that many voters feel that way. What I think, Joe, as well, is that the replacement of Braverman by David Cameron symbolises a party that would rather return to the pre-Brexit broken consensus in British politics than actually reinvent itself to meet the post-Brexit realignment that it won in 2019. That's what's so significant here.
All right, well, get your reaction to that, Ed Vaizey.
Well, I was going to give a glib response, saying I rather enjoyed the pre-Brexit consensus, but I certainly do think Britain was on a roll. But I accept kind of Matthew's critique and challenge, which is Boris Johnson did win a lot of seats in the north of England that we had never won before. The levelling up agenda was serious, and putting the concerns of those voters on the Tory agenda is an important element. So I think it's an acceptable challenge, but I don't think, Suella Braverman was sacked for the reason, it's a victory for woke. It's a victory for the Prime Minister's authority and not having a Home Secretary that calls out her own police force.
Well, Matthew, and then I'll come to you, Andrew. Matthew?
I didn't say this was a victory for the woke. What this is a victory for is the elite consensus in this country, which is basically taking down politicians and figures who challenge the consensus around large-scale migration, a broken political economy, a broken model of multiculturalism. I mean, Joe, there are going to be lots of voters out there today looking at this, looking at every figure who's challenged this consensus. Boris, gone. Liz Truss, gone. Suella Braverman, gone. A Prime Minister who, to be frank, doesn't have much of a democratic mandate out there in the country. And what I'm worried about, Joe, is we no longer seem capable of even entertaining a radical alternative to the status quo.
But it's a slightly odd argument. First of all, it's a bit Nadine Dorries to say that, Liz Truss was taken out by the elite establishment. She was taken out because she took out the economy, and so the Tory party panicked and got rid of her. It's also slightly odd to say that Suella's been taken out by the elite consensus when it is one of the Prime Minister's flagship policies. One of his 5 flagship policies is to stop the boats. He's made it very clear. You can agree with it or disagree with it. The idea that the Prime Minister is out of lockstep with Suella Braverman on that policy doesn't seem to be the case.
Andrew?
Suella's consistently...
Sorry, Matt, I was just going to let Andrew Marr come in.
Very briefly. I'm not sure that Matt's right about how popular Suella Braverman really is up and down the country. She's certainly popular when she talks in some of her remarks about migration, that's for sure. But when she starts to talk about taking away the tents from homeless people, when she starts to attack the police, who, by the way, I think were by and large proved right this weekend on the streets of London, I think that's where she loses a lot of people, including long-term Conservative voters.
Right. Matthew?
No, I don't think that's right at all. I've polled voters and I've written extensively on it. When Suella Braverman said things like she thinks migration is an existential challenge to the country, 66% of voters agreed with her. When she said that she wanted stronger borders, large majorities, over 70%, agree with her. What we're seeing, basically, look, it's whatever you think about how Suella Braverman did her job, whatever you think about whether she was fit for office or whatever, what actually worries me about Britain now is we are incapable of actually entertaining a serious critique and alternative to a liberal elite consensus on these issues. And that is reflected not just in Suella Braverman, but in her replacement by David Cameron. It is ridiculous to think that the answer to the Conservative Party's problems is returning to liberal Cameroon politics. I mean, this is a party that is philosophically and ideologically completely lost.
But why is it ridiculous to think that?
It's ridiculous for lots of reasons.
What is your problem? What is your problem? Is it? I mean, I don't see. Do you want to end all? Do you want to end all?
Hang on, Matthew. Let Ed put the question.
You want to end all immigration? What is your particular issue that is broken about Britain that is so appalling to you?
Well, first of all, I don't want to end all immigration. What do I think is broken with Britain? Lots of things. Under the Conservative Party, we're running net migration at 600,000 plus. We're importing cheap migrant workers to support a political economy.
Suella Braverman has been the Home Secretary, hasn't she?
Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister for 3 years when all that was happening. So
listen, I think the Conservative Party, I think the last 13 years have been a disaster. I think
I mean, it is kind of this kind of weird thing where you put the people who win the referendum in charge, you put Boris in charge, and when things don't get right, this kind of shadowy Liberal consensus is blamed for it. I mean, it's totally bizarre and inchoate argument, and then you get these.
Well, I can actually.
You get these people who claim to be patriots attacking the police and the cenotaph. 9 policemen injured at the cenotaph by people who claim to be standing up for Britain and hitting policemen so they can get to the cenotaph to protect the cenotaph.
Hang on, Matthew.
I couldn't agree more. You know, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, elite consensus, really. Boris Johnson, elite consensus. Liz Truss, elite consensus. James Cleverly, Rishi Sunak, elite Liberal consensus. I think not.
Katie?
Well, I think the problem potentially for Rishi Sunak here is that if you think about that 2019 pitch, it feels as though he has moved away from that with some of the appointments today. Jeremy Hunt, already Chancellor, but of course staying put. You combine that with David Cameron, it feels like we're going back to the Cameroon government. And I think for Rishi Sunak, it's potentially an admission of defeat, because about a month ago, he stood up on stage at his party conference and said he was going to be the change candidate, going against 30 years of consensus, decisions that taken by David Cameron and George Osborne.
Like HS2.
And David Cameron wasn't happy with it. So it feels at the very least there's a change of strategy coming from Rishi Sunak, and perhaps an admission that he doesn't think he can be the change candidate and he quite likes the past.
Matthew?
Yeah, as I just said, I think the Conservatives have presided over a really dismal experiment. They've completely failed to respond to what the post-Brexit environment was all about, and returning to David Cameron is a great symbol of that. This is a party that is completely lost, which I think many voters feel deserves to lose the next election. I completely disagree with what Andrew and the other speaker was saying.
Ed,
I'm just a non-entity.
Look,
Don't worry about me.
I sit in focus groups with voters every week.
All right.
Every week.